Okay, so this week's Parsha is Parshas Mikeitz, begins on page 223 in the Art Scroll Stone Chumash, that's Bereshit chapter 41. The Parsha begins, it happened at the end of 2 years to the day, Paro was dreaming that behold, he was standing over the river, when behold, out of the river there emerged 7 cows of beautiful appearance and robust flesh, and they're grazing in the marshlands, etc. Paro had his dreams, and nobody can interpret them to Paro's satisfaction, and the head butler who had been imprisoned with Yosef and was freed. So he spoke up and told Paro that there was a guy in prison who could interpret dreams, and they brought out Yosef to interpret the dreams, and he was appointed second in command. That's a brief summary of where we're going with this. But the Beis Halevi comments on how the Parsha starts, and it happened at the end of 2 years to the day. And the Hebrew word that he used for the end, Mikeitz, which is the word from that the Parsha is named, Mikeitz, is Mikeitz. It's from the Kates is more than like a time. Kates means like an appointment. Like this is the time that it's supposed to happen. It's the Kates. It's like the end of it's like the time limit. The time limit has been reached. So the Beis Halevi said that word is telling us a very important lesson, and that is that we look at the world as a series of causes and effects. That we understand that things happen, there's a cause and there's an effect. And he gives an example that let's say someone sells some merchandise. So let's say someone sells a house, and how does that happen? A buyer approaches them, they buy the house, and the seller makes a lot of money. And so we look at it as the cause is the buyer needed a house and wanted to buy the house, and the effect is that the seller made a lot of money on it. But he says many times it's actually the opposite. And the real reason why this all happened, the real cause is that it was decreed in heaven that this seller should make a lot of money. And therefore, there was a buyer who came to buy it. And the cause and effects in the spiritual world are really backwards from how we see them in the physical world. And he says that's what the Torah is telling us here, in that if you look at it in a purely physical world sense, so what happened? Paro had these dreams, and nobody knew how to interpret it, and that was the cause that led to the effect of Yosef being let out of prison. But the truth is the opposite, and the Torah begins, happened at the end of 2 years. It was time for Yosef to be free. It was at the end of Yosef's period that he was supposed to be in jail, and Paro had his dreams. So the cause was not the dreams and the effect Yosef going free. In spiritually speaking, the cause was Yosef needed to be freed, and the effect was, therefore, Paro had the dreams to bring that about. Okay, so it's time for Yosef to be freed. So Paro had these dreams, and let's see it inside. Verse 2, when behold, out of the river, this is yet Paro's dream, there emerged 7 cows of beautiful appearance and robust flesh, very healthy looking, and they were grazing in the marshland. Then behold, 7 other cows emerged after them out of the river of ugly appearance and gaunt flesh. They looked very unappealing and unhealthy. And they stood next to the cows on the bank of the river. The cows of ugly appearance and gaunt flesh ate the 7 cows of beautiful appearance and robust, and Paro awoke. And he fell asleep again and dreamt a second time. Behold, 7 ears of corn were sprouting on a single stalk, healthy and good. And behold, 7 ears, thin and scorched by the east wind, were growing after them again. You had these 7 healthy, robust ears of corn, as he calls it, groups of clumps of grain. And after them were 7 very unhealthy looking ones. And the thin ears swallowed up the 7 healthy and full ears. Paro awoke, and behold, it had been a dream. Okay, so I had these 2 dreams. And it was in the morning his spirit was agitated, so he sent and summoned all the necromancers of Egypt and his wise men. Paro related his dream to them, but none can interpret them for Paro. So none of them were able to interpret them for Paro, meaning to his satisfaction. The Medrash says that they said things of the nature of like he was going to have 7 daughters and they would be captured by the enemy. It said things of that nature. Okay, it continues in verse 9. Then the chamberlain of the cupbearers, the head butler, spoke up before Paro. My transgressions do I mention today? That could be dangerous to bring up. Like, remember when I messed up and I sent you to jail? But he said, I have to. So he gave this introduction to say, like, I recognize I'm doing something dangerous, but I'm speaking up because the safety, Paro was very disturbed by this, and I want to remove that disturbance. So he says, Paro had become incensed at his servants and placed me in the ward of the house of the chamberlain of the butchers, me and the chamberlain of the bakers. And on page 225, we dreamt a dream on the same night, I and he, and there was a Hebrew youth, a slave of the chamberlain of the butchers. We related to him, and he interpreted our dreams for us. He interpreted for each in accordance with his dreams. And it was that just as he interpreted for us, so did it happen to me, restored to my post, and to him he was hanged. So he's telling Paro, there's this guy who we were imprisoned with, and he interpreted our dreams, and everything that he said came true. And the commentaries comment that this shows that even though like he's helping out Yosef, he's doing something to help out Yosef, but he's doing as little as he can. And it's not necessary to say that in Hebrew youth, a slave. Why is he giving? There was a guy there who did this. It's a Hebrew youth, a slave. He's trying to put him down as he's letting Paro know. He wants him to make sure his position is secure. And this guy, if Paro Yosef does a good job, he won't be raised up. So he mentioned that he's a Hebrew, which the Egyptians hated, and that he's a slave, and that he's a youth. He's bringing up everything negative about him that he can, so Yosef won't get a good position out of this. Who, Yosef? I don't remember, but he would have been pretty old. I mean, he was, I don't remember the number, I'm sorry. Okay, so let's continue. I mean, you're saying the youth makes it sound like he was young. Let me see, I wanna. Yeah. So Rashi actually comments on that he was a youth. He comments that Shaita, he was a fool. And meaning not just nar, he wasn't really commenting on his youth. He was a nar, he was foolish. And we use nar in Yiddish actually as an expression, like narishkeit. Behold, that means like foolishness. And that comes from the word nar. It comes from it's acting like a kid, like childish. It's a word for foolish. Okay. So in verse 14, so Paro sent and summoned Yosef, and they rushed him from the dungeon. He shaved and changed his clothes, and he came to Paro. 1 second. Oh yeah. And Paro said to Yosef, I dreamt a dream and no one can interpret it, and I heard it said that you can comprehend a dream to interpret it. And Yosef answered Paro, saying, that is beyond me. It is God who will respond with Paro's welfare. And then Paro said over the dreams, and on page 227, verse 25, Yosef said to Paro, the dream of Paro is a single one. What Hashem is about to do, he has told to Paro. And the commentaries say that this is the key that made Paro accept it, is that when the others advisors were saying that it was like Paro would have daughters and they would be captured and things like that, those were they were saying it would be personal problems. And Paro understood that these dreams, the dreams of a ruler aren't about himself. A ruler is kind of, in Yiddish we call batal to the kingdom. He's everything about the ruler has to be concentrated on his kingdom and not his personal problems, because he has the public to deal with. So he understood that these dreams aren't about a personal issue. These dreams are for the public welfare. So it wasn't about his daughters and having tsaris. And when Yosef said, Hashem's telling you what Hashem's going to do, and this is about the country, then he accepted. He says in verse 26, the 7 good cows, there are 7 years, and 7 good ears. There are 7 years. It is a single dream. They're both talking about the same event. Now the 7 emaciated and bad cows who emerged after them, they are 7 years, as are the 7 emaciated ears scorched by the east wind. That's another 7 years. There shall be 7 years of famine. It is this matter that I have spoken to Paro. What God is about to do, he has shown to Paro. Behold, and here's what it means. 7 years are coming, a great abundance throughout all the land of Egypt. You're going to have 7 years that are amazing and productive. Economy is going to be great, and you'll have an abundance of produce. And in verse 30, then 7 years of famine will arise after them, and all the abundance in the land of Egypt will be forgotten. The famine will ravage the land. And that's the meaning of the grains eating let's say the the skinny cows eating the fat cows, and you couldn't even see, it wasn't apparent, they looked exactly the same, saying that though the years of plenty will be consumed by the years of famine, and you'll still be hungry even then. Okay, as for the repetition of the dream to Paro 2 times, it is because the matter stands ready before Hashem, and Hashem is hastening to accomplish it. And in verse 33, there's an interesting addition here. Now let Paro seek out a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Paro proceed and let him appoint overseers on the land, and he shall prepare the land of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. And let them gather all the food of those approaching good years, and let them amass grain under Paro's authority for food in the cities and safeguard it. The food will be reserved for the land against the 7 years of famine, which will befall the land of Egypt, so the land will not perish in the famine. Okay, so he told them what to do. The commentaries ask, who told Yosef, where did he get this chutzpah to start advising Paro? Paro brought him in to interpret the dream. And it seems like he did this. This is what the dream means. And when you're dealing with a Paro, with a pharaoh, with a king, you don't give advice unless you're asked for advice. And this is true in general, that, like when speaking to an authority figure, that we offer what's asked of us, that it's chutzpahdik to say, like, this is what you should be doing. So where did Yosef get this chutzpah to start advising him? Okay, yeah, so where did he get the chutzpah to be advising him that this is what you should be doing, Paro? So, and we see this also later in the Parsha. It's interesting. This comes up in a lot of the commentaries, that like when you ask a question, you answer what was asked, not more. He was asked to interpret the dreams. What's he telling him what to do? So I saw the commentaries say that actually Yosef understood that this wasn't additional advice after having understood what the dream meant, that Yosef understood that when Paro dreamed that he saw the cows eat up he saw the skinny cows eat the fat cows, and the skinny ears of corn eat the fat ears of corn. That wasn't just telling him that they'll be consumed they'll be forgotten. It was telling that was the advice. Meaning the dream wasn't just telling Paro what was to happen. The dream was telling Paro what to do. And that was that in the skinny years, in the lean years, you'll eat the produce of the productive years. So this wasn't just advice Yosef was giving, it was still a part of the interpretation of the dream. So he was actually answering the question that was asked. He was doing his job, not giving advice after the fact. Okay. So on page 229, this is Parshas chapter 41, verse 37. The matter appeared good in Paro's eyes and in the eyes of all his servants. And Paro said to his servants, could we find another like him, a man in whom the Spirit of God is the Spirit of God? Then Paro said to Yosef, since God has informed you of all this, there can be no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and by your command shall all my people be sustained. Only by the throne shall I outrank him. We put him as his second in command, his viceroy. Okay, so but I saw in the commentaries though that just reading this, it looks like a rhetorical question. That can we find another man like him? That sounds like a rhetorical question. He's the best, he's incredible, and he's the one that we should appoint. But I saw some of the commentaries say that he was there was actually a real question. Is that they didn't want to appoint Yosef, like we said, they didn't like Ivris, they didn't like outsiders, and he was a slave, and he was they called him Anar. They didn't like him because he was an Ivri, he was Jewish, he was from the family of Avram. So they were asking, is there anyone else who could do this job? And when it was clear that there was nobody else, so nobody else, and the man who had the Spirit of God, nobody like him. So then they agreed, then Paro appointed him.
He hadn't really proven anything to it.
They asked
his interpretation,
but that was something that all the wise men of Egypt, it says the Khartoumim, the necromancers, that was their religious authorities, couldn't come up with something. And when Yosef did, as it says here, a man in whom is in the Spirit of God, he has he was obviously graced by God, especially since when they asked him they said, "We hear you could interpret dreams." He didn't attribute it to himself. He said, "God will, reveal whatever He'll reveal." So when he was able, they asked, like, "Is there anyone in Egypt who has this godliness? Like our necromancers can hack it, but could someone else?" Okay, so now in verse 41, then Paro said to Yosef, "See, I have placed you in charge of all the land of Egypt." And Paro removed his ring from his hand, put it on Yosef's hand. He then had him dressed in garments of fine linen, placed a gold chain upon his neck. He had him ride in the second royal chariot and proclaimed before him Avrech. That's like a great, it's almost like an equal. Okay. So it means like it comes from Ab, it comes from father, like he's like the father of the nation. Okay, so continuing on, he called Yosef Safas Paneach and gave him Asna's daughter of Potiphar, the chief of On, for a wife. And the commentaries say that this Potiphar was actually Potiphar, the one who he was sold to originally. Yes. Okay, and I'll continue on. It's interesting that Rashi says that it calls him here Potiphera. Before he was called Potiphar. And the Rashi brings that the Medrash says that Potiphera is a more like feminine form of the name, and it was because the same way his wife desired Yosef and tried to seduce Yosef, Potiphar found himself also desiring Yosef, and he castrated himself. So now it's using a more feminine form of the name. Yep. Yes. Well. So moving on. Okay, in verse 47, at the bottom of 229, the earth produced during the 7 years of abundance by the handfuls. And he gathered all the food, and they did what his advice, that they preserved all the food in the land. On page 50, on verse 50 on page 231. Now to Yosef were born 2 sons when the year of famine had not yet set in, whom Asnas, the daughter of Potiphar, chief of On, bore him. Yosef called the name of the firstborn Menashe, for Hashem has made me forget all my hardship and all my father's household. And the name of the second son he called Ephraim, for Hashem has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering. And he named his sons, even being king and the ruler of the second in command of Egypt. He named his sons names that were indicative of the fact that he recognized he was in Galus, that he was in exile, and he was being kept away from really where we should be. Okay, and then it came to pass, and the 7 years of famine came. In verse 55, when all the land of Egypt hungered, when the years of famine came, the people cried out to Paro for bread. So Paro said to all of Egypt, "Go to Yosef, whatever he tells you to do, you should do." When the famine spread over all the face of the earth, Yosef opened all the containers and sold provisions to Egypt, and the famine became severe in the land of Egypt. All the earth came to Egypt to Yosef to provide provisions, for the famine became severe in all the earth. Egypt was the only place really that had this food. So now on page 233, Yaakov perceived that there were provisions in Egypt. So Yaakov said to his sons, "Why do you make yourself conspicuous?" And he said, "Behold, I have heard that there are provisions in Egypt. Go down there and purchase for us from there that we may live and not die." So I think the Malbim says like this, make yourself conspicuous. That's saying that Yaakov was very, very wealthy. So he was actually not short on food because he could buy, and it was available. People would bring back from Egypt. It was available in Canaan. It was just very, very, very expensive, which is the case in a famine. The prices get outrageous. So Yaakov could afford it and other people couldn't. So he said, rather than being conspicuous, and that's something that we try not to do, we don't flaunt our wealth to make those around us jealous of us. He says that rather that you should act in harmony with what people are doing around you in this regard, and go to Egypt to get bread there instead of spending all this money to avoid that. So, where am I? So he sent them down to buy from Egypt. And in verse 3, so Yosef's brothers, 10 of them, went down to buy grain in Egypt. And here the Malbim comments that it says Yosef's brothers, and was that Rashi? Yeah. That the Rashi comments that it says that Yosef's brothers went down to buy grain from Egypt, to tell you that they were going down as Yosef's brothers, meaning they had regret for selling him, and they were going down to look for him. And they were going down also, part of their going down was in the role of brothers of Yosef, to look for Yosef and try to redeem him and bring him back. So in verse 6, now Yosef, he was the viceroy over the land. He was the provider to other people of the land. Yosef's brothers came and bowed to him, face to the ground. And Yosef saw his brothers. Let's see. Yosef saw his brothers. He recognized them, but he acted like a stranger towards them and spoke with them harshly. He asked them, "From where do you come?" And they said, "From the land of Canaan to buy food." Yosef recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. So he recognized them. The commentaries say that he left without a beard. Now he had a beard, or that he, or that it was beyond, like Yosef was expecting them, and especially because, for two reasons. First of all, he knew that there was no food around, and he remembered his dreams. His dreams, which he knew was prophecy, were that his, first that the grains, that the stalks of the bundles of grain representing his brothers were going to bow down to him. So he was expecting his brothers to come down and that to be fulfilled. But the brothers couldn't imagine that Yosef would be, they sold as a slave, would be this viceroy of Egypt. That just didn't even enter their minds to even think to, like, that guy looks familiar.
Younger, so he probably would change.
What's that?
He was younger.
Yeah. So, and like I said, he had a beard now that he didn't have before.
So, hearing the garments.
Yes. And that's also mentioned by the commentaries, that his, he wasn't wearing, right, it was a completely different look. Okay, so on page 235, in verse 9, Yosef recalled the dreams that he had dreamt about them. So he said to them, "You are spies, to see the land's nakedness you have come." And they have this whole conversation, which I'll get into. But first it begins that Yosef recalled the dreams that he had dreamt about them. So the Malbim says this is answering, why didn't he just tell them immediately? "I am Yosef. Great to see you guys." He was like, they couldn't hurt him now if he was worried about them hurting him. He was the second viceroy of Egypt. Why is he putting them through all the tsuris that he's going to put them through? It's because he remembered his dreams. And what were his dreams? Like we said, the first dream was that 11 bundles of grain bowed down to his bundle. And the second dream was the stars, I think it was 11 stars, the sun and the moon bowed down to him. So he understood that first the 11 brothers would bow down to him. That hasn't happened yet because Binyamin wasn't there, so it was just 10 of them. So he felt that he had to bring about those dreams first, and that would be have Binyamin come and bow to him, and along with the others, and bow down to him. And then he needed Yaakov and the rest of the family to come to fulfill the second dream. So this had to be done first. So he said to them, "You are spies, to see the land's nakedness you have come." And in verse 10, they answered him, "Not so, my lord, for your servants have come to buy food. All of us, sons of one man are we. We are truthful people. Your servants have never been spies." And he said to them, "No, but the land's nakedness have you come to see?" And they replied, "We, your servants, are 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. The youngest is now with our father, and one is gone." And in verse 14, but Yosef said to them, "It is just as I have declared to you, you are spies." And this whole conversation is like bizarre. What's the conversation? We're spies? No, you're not. Yes, you are. You know, you're not. And sometimes he says you're spies. Sometimes he says you're coming to see the land's nakedness. He like kind of switches there. Okay, and I saw there are a lot of approaches amongst the commentaries to what exactly this conversation is. I saw the Kli Yakar has his approach, and the Malbim and the Beis Halevi actually start off very similar, but then they diverge. I'll go mostly with the Malbim, but maybe mix in a little bit of the Beis Halevi. And that is that spies, there are two types of spies. One type of spy There might be more, but there are two that we're going to deal with. One type of spy is let's say there's a group that feels constrained where they are. They need to burst forth and expand. And so they go looking for what would be a good place. Meaning, do we want this? Do we want this place? It's like people are house hunting. They go look at the house to see, do I want this house? Do we not want this house? Does this work for us? That's one type. That's one type. And another type is who looking at it to try to figure out a way to get it, which is more a military scout that will look at a city. Let's say the first group will look at a city to see, do we want to conquer that city? And the second group will look at the city to see, how can we conquer that city? What's the right approach? So, the Malbim, the Beis Halevi, they say that when Yosef said, you are spies to see the land's nakedness you have come, what triggered that? Why? Meaning, what are the brothers thinking? Like all of a sudden, it's like out of nowhere, this guy's saying, you're spies. Where did that come from? Does he do that to everyone? So Rashi says that they came in through 10 different gates. So and they did that to look for Yosef, but he said that looks like your spies. But the Beis Halevi and the Malbim say that he asked them where in verse 7. He asked them, from where do you come? That's on page 233, verse 7. From where do you come? And they said, from the land of Canaan to buy food. Again, he didn't ask them why they're there. He asked them where you're coming from. And like we said earlier, that especially when you're dealing with a king, an authority figure, you answer the question that's asked. They say that in police interactions in court. You don't volunteer any information. You answer the question that's asked. He asked, where are you coming from? And they said, the right answer is, we're coming from the land of Canaan. Why are they adding, and we came to buy food? So he said that makes it sound like you're spies. You have this guilty conscience. You're answering questions that you weren't asked yet. Is because you're nervous and you're spies. So that was his accusation. But he said two things. You are spies, to see the land's nakedness have you come. So when he said you are spies, that means that you have a history of being spies, meaning you've been here before, already decided that you want to conquer Canaan, and now all you're doing is looking at the land's nakedness. You want to see, how will we conquer it? The land's nakedness means what are its vulnerabilities? Just as an aside, the Beis Halevi says that when he says you are spies, that means that's your profession, meaning that there are people who are trained as spies, and they could, someone who's trained as spies also goes to the store and buys food. Not necessarily at every moment are they actively engaged in spycraft. But he said, you're spies, that's your profession, and you're here on a mission as acting as spies. So in verse 10, they answered him, not so, my lord, for your servants have come to buy food. All of us sons of one man are we are truthful people, your servants have never been spies. So like the Beis Halevi, you understand, they're saying, first of all, we've never, we're not here engaged in spycraft, we're here to buy food. And secondly, we've never been spies. That's not what our profession is. But how the Malbim understands this is that they didn't actually understand exactly what he was saying. And they were answering that part about being spies to decide if they want the place. And they said, we're not spies. We're not spying to decide, do we want to conquer Egypt? For your servants have come to buy food. We're not here for that. And all of us sons of one man are we. We're all sons of one man. And the only reason why you'd send a bunch of people in is because if they have different agendas. And you have to decide, does it work for him? Does it work for him? Does it work for all of you? But if we're all sons of one man, we're all from one family, so there's no reason to send 10 of us. It would make more sense to send one person because they all have the same agenda. You have to say, does it work for us, for our family? That's really all that matters. So in verse 12, and he said to them, no, but the land's nakedness have you come to see. He's saying that I wasn't accusing you of coming to see if you wanted. I said you did that already. And I'm accusing you of spying it out to see how to conquer it. And when you do that, if you want to see the vulnerabilities, so you're putting yourself at danger, you might be going near military facilities, you're spying out where the soldiers are, or where the fortifications are. and then there's danger of being attacked. So you want to come in a group so you can defend yourself. And in verse 13, and they replied, we, your servants, are 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. The youngest is now with our father, and one is gone. So what was their answer there? They were saying, we're all from one family. There are 12 of us. One of them's gone, and one is the youngest. So no father would send all his sons on a mission, because that would put them in danger. And he's saying that no father would if you would send 10 people, you'd send 10 people from different families. So like you preserve someone from each family or a group from each family. No father would send all 10 sons to put them in danger to be killed at the same time in the same mission. And he's saying, don't think that there are 20 sons, so he's only putting half his sons in danger, that there's only us plus one who's missing already anyway, and one who's just the youngest. And to that that Yosef answered, but Yosef said to them, it is justified to declare to you, you are spies. They said, that's actually the opposite. That's proof that that now we have proof that you're really spies. Because if you're all from one family, why are there 10 of you here to begin with? You're saying if you're coming to buy food, so I'd understand if there are 50 of you, you're from a really big family, there are 50 of you, or you're each coming for a different family, so you need 10 of you to bring back all the food. But if you're just a family of 13 or 14, whatever it is, he's saying like you and your one brother who's home, and then your father and his wives. So why do you need to send 10 of you? Just send one of you to bring the food back. So he's saying the fact that you have so many people, that's proof that you are spies. Okay, and now, so he said, so what are we going to do about this? So in verse 15, he's not going to execute them without absolute proof. By this shall you be tested. By Paro's life, you will not leave here unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of you and let him fetch your brother while you shall remain in prison, so that your words may be tested whether the truth is with you. But if not, by Paro's life, surely you are spies. And he herded them into a ward for a 3-day period. So he told them the way that they're going to test them is that he'll keep all of them in prison, except they'll send one of them back to go get the one that they claimed was their younger brother. And how is that proof? If they bring back the younger brother, what does that prove? They could be any random person. But if you have 10 of them in prison, so they could interrogate them separately, and they could, they could do a lineup and have Binyamin, the one that they bring claiming to be Binyamin, along with 5 other people. Or they could bring a fake person to one of them and say, here's your brother. And if he welcomes him as his brother, so then they know it's false. And that's the way that he would prove that they're telling the truth. So in verse 18, still on page 235, Yosef said to them on the 3rd day, after 3 days in prison, do this and live, I fear God. He's saying, I'm not going to keep all of you in prison for this, because I fear God, and that wouldn't be just in case you're innocent. So if you're truthful people, let one of your brothers be imprisoned in your place of confinement while you go and bring provisions for the hunger of your household. All of you could go back, except for one has to stay in prison. Then bring your younger brother to me so that your words will be verified and you will not die. And they did so. And the Malbim says just the fact that they would accept this would be proof that they're telling the truth. Because let's say they're lying. So who's going to volunteer to stay behind, knowing that they're not going to bring a brother, they're not going to bring someone back, because why should they put themselves in danger again? And they could test him by bringing a fake person or doing a lineup. They could test him. So why would someone stay behind, knowing that they were probably not going to come back anyway? He's just allowing himself to be executed. So just by one of them staying behind would indicate that he trusts that they'll come back, because they're in fact telling the truth. And that was the test, and they did so. So they left Shimon back, as we'll see. So now on page 237, so they said to one another, indeed we are guilty concerning our brother, inasmuch as we saw his heartfelt anguish when he pleaded with us, and we paid no heed. This is why this anguish has come upon us. And Reuven spoke up to them, saying, did I not speak to you, saying, do not sin against the boy, but you would not listen? And his blood as well, behold, it is being avenged. So until this point, the Malbim says they thought he was just a cruel person. Yosef was just the viceroy, was just a cruel person, and he was just doing this as a sadistic exercise. But once he could have kept them all in prison, he could have executed them, that he let them all go except one of them. And he said, I fear God. They recognized that that's the truth. He didn't have to do that. And they said, so if he's being merciful and still doing this, we must be being punished by Hashem. And this is a punishment for having sold Yosef. And they recognize the midah connected midah, the measure for measure, that they're being punished, that they did this to Yosef because of his bearing tales about them. And now they're being accused of being spies, and they're suffering for that. That spy is pretty much a talebearer. That's their job, is to, reveal what's going on somewhere. So when they're being accused of being spies, that's what they're accusing Yosef of doing. And they recognized that they were being punished for that. So in verse 23, now they did not know that Yosef understood, for an interpreter was between them. So Yosef overheard them talking and understood. They didn't know that because when they were talking to him, there was an interpreter. He turned away from them and wept. He returned to them and spoke to them. He took Shimon from them and imprisoned him before their eyes. So he took Shimon because, first of all, he was the instigator of selling him. And because when Shimon and Levi are together, trouble follows, especially when they're being threatened. So he kept them apart by keeping Shimon behind. Okay, Yosef returned their money and left it in the sacks. And when they find it, they were very scared because they thought this is another way to get us in trouble, that he's going to say, you stole their money back. Okay, so they came back to Yaakov, and where am I? In verse 35, then as they were emptying their sacks, behold, every man's bundle of money was in a sack. When they and their father saw their bundles of money, they were terrified. I'm on page 239, verse 36. Their father Yaakov said to them, I am the one whom you bereaved. Yosef is gone, Shimon is gone, and now you would take away Benjamin. Upon me has it all fallen. And he would not agree to, Reuven said, take him with me. You may slay my two sons if I fail to bring him back to you. Put him in Micah, I'll return him to you. And Yaakov refused. Obviously, that wasn't really an offer to kill his two sons. He was trying to say, I'm guaranteeing I'll bring him back. But Yaakov refused. So on the bottom of 239, chapter 43, the famine was severe in the land. When they had finished eating all the provisions for which they had brought from Egypt, their father said to them, go back, buy some food. And Yehuda said, we can't go unless we bring Binyamin. And I'll start from verse 7 on page 241. And they said, the man persistently asked about us, a relative, saying, is your father still alive? If your brother responded to him according to these words, could we possibly have known he would say, bring your brother down? And then Yehuda said to his father, send the lad with me, and let us arise and go, so we will live and not die. We will do as well as our children. We as well as you as well as your children. I will personally guarantee him of my own hand. You can demand him. If I do not bring him back to you and stand him before you, then I will have sinned to you for all time. For had we not delayed by now, we could have returned twice. And Israel, their father, said to him, if it must be so, then do this, take of the land's glory, bring him a tribute of balsam, honey, wax, lotus, pistachios, almonds, and double the money, and take your brother and arise, return to the man. So when Yehuda guaranteed him, he agreed to let him go. And in verse 14, and may Kel Shakai grant you mercy before the man, that he may release to you, your other brothers, as well as Binyamin. Okay. So, and as for me, as I have bereaved, so am I bereaved. Okay. So they did this, they came, and so they told him what happened. They told him we got home and saw the money was in our sacks. So on page 243, verse 23, he replied, peace with you. Fear not, your God and the God of your father has put a hidden treasure in your sacks. Your payment has reached me, and he brought Shimon out to them. So he said, I accept it. He says, I accept your excuses. Basically, I got your money, and now, if you found money, that's a gift from God. So then in verse 24 on page 243, then the man brought the men into Joseph's house. He provided water, and they washed their feet and gave feet to their donkeys. They prepared the tribute for when Joseph would come at noon. They had heard that they would eat a meal there. They were going to eat with Yosef, so they prepared their tribute, the gifts that Yaakov prepared for them.
He rebelled, built himself at this point.
Not yet, no. So on page 245, verse 26, when Yosef came into the house, they brought the tribute that was in their hands to him to the house. They prostrated themselves towards him to the ground. He inquired after their welfare, and he said, "Is your aged father of whom you spoke at peace? Is he still alive?" They replied, "Your servant, our father, is at peace. He still lives." And they bowed and prostrated themselves. Then he lifted up his eyes and saw his brother Binyamin, his mother's son. So he said, "Is this your little brother of whom you spoke to me?" And he said, "But God be gracious to you, my son." Then Yosef rushed, because in compassion for his brother has been stirred, and he wanted to weep. So he went to the room and wept there. He washed his face and went out, and they served food. And in verse 23, they served him separately and them separately. For the Egyptians who ate with him separately, the Egyptians who ate with them separately, for the Egyptians could not bear to eat food with the Hebrews, it being loathsome to the Egyptians, that the Egyptians loathed the Hebrews so much they wouldn't even eat with them. Okay. Okay, and in verse 33, they were seated before him, the firstborn according to seniority, the youngest according to his youth. The men looked at one another in astonishment at his wisdom. He was able to understand and actually arrange them by age order, with presumably not knowing them. Okay, and he had portions that had set before that had been set before him served to them, and Binyamin's portion was 5 times as much as the portion of any of them. They drank and became intoxicated with him. That now he was testing them, because remember that the beginnings of their hatred for Yosef was because Yaakov had treated him better and had favored him. So now Yosef was favoring Binyamin to see how their attitudes towards Binyamin would be. Okay. So on page 247, chapter 44, then he instructed the one in charge of the house, saying, "Fill the men's sack with as much food as they can carry. Put each man's money in the mouth of his sack again. And my goblet, the silver goblet, place it in the mouth of the youngest one's sack along with the money of his purchase." And he followed his words exactly. And here again, he's trying to see if see if there's any hatred for Binyamin, if they would be okay with Binyamin being taken. Because remember, Yosef and Binyamin were the only sons of Rachel. So they thought if once Yosef was gone, so Yaakov might have treated Binyamin better, and there might be jealousy there too between the brothers and Binyamin. So he wanted to say, will they fight for him or not? And this was the big test. So when they left, and Yosef sent someone after them, so to say Menashe, and accused them of having stolen his goblet. And in verse 7, and they said to him, "Why does my Lord say such thing? Because it would be sacrilegious for your servants to do such a thing. Here, look, the money that we found in the mouths of our sack, we brought back to you from the land of Canaan. How then could we have stolen from your master's house any silver or gold?" They're saying, if we were thieves, we would have kept the money that we found in the sacks. We brought it back. Well, you think we'll steal more? Anyone from among your servants with whom it is found shall die, and we will also become slaves to my Lord. And they said, "Okay, that sounds good." He said, and he actually said, "What you say now is also correct. The one with whom it is found shall be my slave. The rest of you shall be exonerated." This, it was one person who did, not all of you. And they found the goblet in Binyamin's sack. So on page 249, verse 13, they rent their garments. That means they tore their garments. Each one reloaded his donkey, and they returned to the city. When Yehuda arrived with his brothers to Yosef's house, he was still there. They fell to the ground before him. Yosef said to them, "What is this deed that you have done? Do you not realize that a man like me practices divination? You thought I wouldn't notice that it was gone and wouldn't know where it went?" He says, "I'm the viceroy of Egypt, which is a center of magic. I would know how to, I'd be able to figure that out." So in verse 16, so Yehuda said, "What can we say to my Lord? How can we speak and how can we justify ourselves? Hashem has uncovered the sin of your servants. Here we are ready to be slaves to my Lord, both we and the one in whose hand the goblet was found." And 17, but he replied, "It would be sacrilegious for me to do this. The man in whose possession the goblet was found, only he shall be my slave. And as for you, go up in peace to your father." And he sent him you sent them back. And next week's Parsha will continue with the pleading for Binyamin and eventually the revelation of Yosef. That next week's Parsha, Yosef will reveal himself to his brothers, and the Haftarah is the regular Mikeitz Haftarah. We're back to regular programming, and tomorrow is the last day of Hanukkah. So Shabbos is not Hanukkah anymore. Okay, shkoyach, everybody have a great Shabbos.